Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 181. And this episode, we hope you're traveling when you listen to this podcast, because what is a podcast but some friends that are with you wherever you go? And while you listen to Matt and I talk to each other, you can go about your adventure and just imagine that we're along for the ride, because we want to talk about party banter, the sort of conversations and storytelling that happen with the choices we make in the games we play.
Yeah, I often think of podcasts as conversations that I'm a part of that I cannot interject in. And that is super frustrating when you know the people podcasting and you can't interject because you're still not there in the room, even if you know those people.
You're cursed to be the silent protagonist in your own life.
Basically, yes. We teased it in the loading episode, but I think the idea of it most popularized for me is in the BioWare games like Knights of the Old Republic and Mass Effect and Dragon Age, and how when you're running around in the world doing things that are not cutscenes and not main story missions, you will get banter between the characters chatting, not always to the main character, sometimes just to each other, to interact and for you to learn more about them. I think it's important to highlight where this kind of comes from, at least where I remember it most earnestly, is like in games like Chrono Trigger and the early Final Fantasies. Some of the characters that you brought would affect how responses were to certain things, reactions to certain events that happen. The one I always remember with Chrono Trigger is when you do something that has to do with Chrono, the main character, much later on, the response to that action is dependent on who's in your party at the time, and there's like a hierarchy of who will hug Chrono after that moment based on the hierarchy. Also reminded of the Golden Saucer moment in both versions of Final Fantasy VII, Rebirth, and the original. Certain things you did in the game will determine who you go on your date with. And I still am a stand for the Barrett date, because I think we all need that little bit of homosexuality in our lives.
You can bro it up however you'd like.
I think it's interesting when it's mostly RPGs, but a lot of other games too. Some action games will change the interactions based on who you bring along. And I think that's just a really fascinating way of telling stories, not just the main story, but also the stories between the characters.
Right. I also think of this sort of the party banter, that idea stemming from older turn-based RPGs and your party composition when they were characters and not just generic units. So, first Final Fantasy is a little SOL there. But in those games, you had to choose to have those interactions. You had to walk up to everybody and talk to them. In the same way that you could find so many things about what area you're in, hints about upcoming fights, bits of world building and tidbits from just walking around, barging into every house that wasn't locked and talking to everyone you can. Every man, woman, child, animal, creature, inanimate object, or hooded figure that you could find to try to fill in these gaps. And you could find a lot of fun stuff. Again, think on Final Fantasy VII. The plot of Final Fantasy VII is surprisingly coherent in general, but very bizarre to get to and get through if you don't, in fact, go and talk to everyone and everything. For some folks, that can be fun and that can be great. And for other people, that is utter tedium. I do love the fact that nowadays, where technology and game design has reached, we're able to have voiced conversations that happen during loading sequences, like in the elevators in Mass Effect, as we alluded to last episode, in times when you're just sort of walking around the world. And whether it's a game where you can choose your party, or it's a game like Final Fantasy 15, where you're the Chocobros, and what's being said and done there is still an aspect of world building. The question of how you build your relationships, how you build your world, is a consistent one and a constant one, and the tools at your disposal change. I think this is a pretty fun one. Also, I just really enjoy what a lot of writers choose to put into those conversations.
Right. So a lot of this is also inspired by the fact that I'm currently playing through Dragon Age the Veilguard, which, again, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the series that really brings party banter to the forefront, along with the Mass Effect games. There were other games that did it as well, but for me, at least, because I played them the most, it's the one that comes to mind first. What I like about the Dragon Age series specifically is that you're just as likely to get a goofy conversation between two characters who can't stand each other as you are a real conversation about the stakes in the world and how those characters move through it. And you can't always predict when that's going to happen. And I really enjoy that. It can go either way. It can really add to the character development of these characters that you're already falling in love with. one of my favorite early moments in Dragon Age Inquisition is it's revealed that one of the characters, Cassandra, who's this like stoic soldier character, really likes these steamy romance novels. But what she didn't realize is that Varric, one of the most irritating characters to her, dwarven adventurer, thief, and general kind of like ladies' man, writes those stories and is the author of them. And once that comes to fruition within the main narrative, then there's party banter about Cassandra kind of trying to pry like plot details of the next book that's not finished yet and driving Varric crazy because he doesn't want to reveal his process, which also in a post George R.R. Martin still not finishing books era just feels very funny on a multitude of levels.
Yeah, but ultimately, for all the things that Varric has done or not done in those games, he's probably the least problematic fantasy author I've run into.
That's also probably true. And it's funny, like, could you enjoy the game without that banter? For sure. But does it make the characters feel more realistic to have those moments? Also, yes. Like, there's one of Tali and Garrus, I believe, in the second game, either the second or third game, talking about how Garrus talks about how he misses the elevator conversations.
Yes.
And eventually annoys Tali into threatening him with a shotgun blast to the face because she's not in the mood. And that's also very funny. And I like that kind of self-awareness. There have been nods in the new Dragon Age to Mass Effect games and previous Dragon Age games as well. And I think it just, again, in games that are so character-focused, which those BioWare titles are, it's another way to get to know the characters, fall in love with them, enjoy who they are, and decide who you want to pal around with other than who is the hottest character, though that may also affect it.
With this sense of personality from your party, you have mechanical choices and you have narrative choices as well. You have those people where it's just, who do I want to bring with me? Who do I want to hear talk? Who do I think, no, they're being too much of a dick. They got to stay at the bottom floor of Tartarus for a little while, Junpei. Sarah and I are in January of Persona 3 Reload right now, so we're pretty close to the end of the game. And only in this month did we finally start bringing Junpei with us for anything more than just leveling him up a little bit to like get him to catch up. There's just been an utter, as far as story and his banter and everything else, Sarah just being like, no, you stay down there. I don't want you traveling with me. Stop that. Some things have shifted, but not really. It's that kind of like, what does he have, a sword and fire magic? We could do that. We don't need him. And these are those choices that come up. I remember playing through Final Fantasy VI and always wanting to bring Sabin with me because I like his reactions to things. And I like monks. So that was probably one of the best choices I got to make. With Sarah and Dragon Age, her Inquisition run, she never took out Iron Bull or Sarah from her party if she could help it. She would also usually bring Dorian. So that was just kind of her nice little queer polycule thing going on. And the conversations in particular that Iron Bull and Sarah would have are fantastic. And Iron Bull is an excellent example of a character where you get goofy conversations, you get world building, you get serious stakes, you get commentary on relationships between factions and everything else. And there again, sometimes you can trigger these sorts of conversations, whether in Inquisition or other games, or they just happen. It's another way that it also makes each of these characters feel alive. In early days of voice clips and what have you, these voice clips would go over and over and over again. And even if they're happening in battle and you're hearing the same two or three, I mean, honestly, imagine yourself in a fight. How many quips are you really going to have? It's harder to come up with good one-liners than you think. But the conversations that everybody has, maybe they are somewhere and it reminds them of something ridiculous, or they're trying to lighten the mood. Maybe they are taking this more seriously than everybody else and it's hitting them very hard. It is another aspect of smart or efficient storytelling.
Yeah, and to be clear, not all party banter is smart or intelligent or good storytelling.
Oh, absolutely not.
But that said, even those kinds of moments I think still are fun. There were lots of complaints, and I think we touched on this in our signposting episode, but the pawn banter in Dragon's Dogma, both 1 and 2, but especially 2, is constant, unoriginal, and irritating. But to me, that adds charm. I really enjoy the 10th time they've pointed out a chest that we just can't get to, and if only we could figure out a way.
Mm-hmm.
It's endlessly amusing to me, whereas I know other folks were driven crazy by that. But like, I think it still shows the dynamic of how much the pawns look up to you and rely on you. And the pawns' relationship, especially in Dragon's Dogma 2, is kind of integral to the storytelling of that plot. in a way that it was in the first one, but not like it just feels more lifelike. And I think that ridiculous and annoying and constant party banter is part of it in a way that, like we're saying in the Dragon Age games, the Mass Effect games, it's deeper storytelling, it's more nuanced. But lack of nuance doesn't automatically make it bad. It can still be entertaining in a bunch of different ways.
Right. And if it's just stuff that's being said and stuff that's happening, you can react to it in real time as the player. To think on Persona 3 Reload a little more, as I mentioned in the previous episode, I am a little disappointed that when little quips and banters and conversations that come up while you're exploring Tartarus, while you're exploring the main dungeon area, anytime you find a treasure chest, anytime you start a battle, anytime you open your menu and close it again while that conversation is happening, it ends immediately, which disappoints me. This is really the only spot where you get to passively check in with everybody. Persona uses a calendar-based system day by day, and at the end of the day, you're back at the dorms and all of your party members are there. And it'll let you know if they've got something new to say about whatever's going on or what they're up to. But when I'm playing with Sarah doesn't really check those unless I'm going, I want to know what they're thinking. Can you talk to them, please? She's just, what are we doing tonight? We're playing this, we're doing this. Okay, cool. And so that idea of filling in the gaps and really getting to know everybody can fall by the wayside there. It's there if you want to engage with it. If you're just playing the game and running the dungeons and maxing out your social links, cool. That's also a lot of fun. And it's also a huge reason why I play those games. But thinking on Final Fantasy, I remember playing through Final Fantasy VIII recently, and now knowing how to get through the game as well as I do, which isn't fantastic and the best ever, but pretty damn good. It sometimes feels like some of the emotional developments that happen so quickly. But I also remember when I first played Final Fantasy VIII back in the late 90s, it took me a little while to get through areas. I'm trying bosses over and over again. I'm trying certain mini games. I am talking to everyone in every town and every door and what have you, so that when I get to whatever developments are going on between characters, I'm 40, 50 hours into the game. And however many days, weeks, whatever the in-game storyline is, I've been playing it for ages. And I've had opportunities to have little one-liners and conversations, even as so-called deep as a PS1 RPG's conversation can get, that's unvoiced in just a couple text boxes. But it encourages me to invest in those characters and to invest in the story. And so when those things happen, we can sit here and snark and go, well, that came out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere for me because I had taken the time to get to know everyone. This is another way that when you have those little bits of banter, you get to know them and you get to care about them. And so you can take those big swings of a story where video games, the way that the narratives work, subtlety is wonderful. And when you can get a subtle plot point through, oh my God, that's amazing. Like the finesse and all of that. But, we're talking a lot about role-playing games. These have world-ending consequences. These have invading forces. These have planetary destroying lasers. These have all this crazy stuff. You take big swings. Finding a spot for the little moments so that you can rest and relax, or so you can enjoy the company of the people that you have been traveling with for 5 hours, 10 hours, 40 hours, days, weeks, years, depending upon the storyline. Those are important too. Whether they're funny, whether they're serious or anything else, I like that they're there.
Yeah, and I think it really leads into something that also I think goes hand in hand with this in modern games, something that spawned whole segments on my other podcast, Reignite, but a check-in section where you get to check in with your party either on your spaceship, at your campsite. Baldur's Gate 3, one of the most well-known video games of the last decade and one of the most popular and best-selling, has that a ton. I mean, there are the campsite check-ins, the party members you bring with them, chat with each other. If you're playing it the way Geoff and I are predominantly playing with it, you are with most, if not all, custom characters. So you don't get the banter when you're out in the world, but you do get it in the campsite when you check in with everybody. I love this idea of like a downtime during this great chaos to hear what these characters have to say. And party banter enhances that, right? Like if I'm traveling around with Harding and Nev in Dragon Age the Veilguard, and I really enjoyed what they were getting on about during the mission, how we interacted in the main story, when we get back to the lighthouse, I really want to know what's going on. I really want to understand how they felt about this thing that happened. or find an opportunity to flirt with them, the most important reason to do a check-in in a home base.
Obviously.
I think that that's something that carries over not just from the BioWare titles. Now, Baldur's Gate 3 is in a franchise that was spearheaded by BioWare, though they did not make the third game. And so there's a lot of that ethos rolled into it, but I think it's more rooted in old school action games and RPGs. You're talking about Persona, like Persona 5 has that, which I love, the ability to check in with those characters, go on hangouts with them, build the relationships. I mean, there's a whole social link system that's designed, but even in more recent comic book games like Midnight Suns, which I've not played, but I've read a bunch about and do want to play at some point, basically has in the mansion wholeheartedly those BioWare check-in moments, but with Marvel characters, and you're a custom character. And I think that's also really cool because you get to interact with characters that you, by all accounts, know really well, but you maybe get to learn even more about them that you didn't know, even though they are super popular characters. I like this idea of giving a field for these moments to hang out with. Final Fantasy 16 has a home base where you work out of, and especially in the back half of the game, and there are tons of characters there where you can get side quests, which are fine, but also get to know some of the more important characters within the story by going to chat with them and check on them and all of that stuff as well. And I think that this is one hand that washes the other of how you get to know a party and the narrative, besides just directly the narrative telling you, is with these campsites and spaceships and other things that you can hang out with, have leisure moments with the party members and check in to ask them what's going on. And if you don't like a certain character, completely skip them and not interact with them at all. Though, I am someone who have learned the hard way that that can be a mistake. Caden Olenko, a character who I love now and romanced in my Reignite playthrough, I basically ignored in my early playthroughs because he seemed very cardboard, very bland. But it's because you need to get him out of his shell. And literally checking in with him, you get the story of why he is the way he is. That's also a really fun thing, that you can make assumptions about these characters as if they were real people, and then learn more about them and either it break your expectation or reinforce it based on how intimate and interactive these moments can be.
Which is so very lifelike and wonderful.
Yeah.
There is something to checking in with your characters regardless, to confirm, to delve, to open up. I mean, talking about Marvel characters, it's one thing where, oh yeah, that's Wolverine. Everybody knows Wolverine. He's the best he is at what he does. What he does is appear in every game. But what version of Wolverine is this? How old is that version of Spider-Man? What tragedies and windfalls has he lived through? What interpretation of these characters is there? When a character is created for a game, you get to know them better. You get to know Caden better through those check-ins in Mass Effect. You get to know licensed characters in a licensed game and where they fit in the world by checking in with them. Because that's another one where you can make assumptions and go, oh no, wait. I mean, that's just comics in general. Oh no, this fact that I knew about this character is just a thing that we agree on sometimes. And the people who made this game didn't agree with that, or it didn't agree with the narrative. It's another way of learning the nature of your world. Another aspect of this kind of like passive party banter where you don't have to go and turn it on, it just happens. Another way that this helps world building is actually outside of the party. Nowadays, you can also travel through the overworld or wherever you are in an open world game, an RPG, an action title, and NPCs will be talking to each other and have conversations. And we get to learn more of the world that way as well. And sometimes this lends itself towards funny little moments. I know the Halo games, the original trilogy on Xbox and 360, had tons of little moments where you go over somewhere and there's a whole conversation. All of the creators from Red vs. Blue have a conversation between a locked door, and they're different characters depending upon which difficulty you're playing, which is just a fun little Easter egg. But, you don't go and hit action button to activate this. You wander over to a place, and there's a guy just like, let me in. What's the password? I don't remember the password. Well, can't let you in. How do I know? Kind of conversation going on. All the way up till now where, say, like Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth. I remember in Remake walking through Midgar and really getting a feel for this goddamn city because you're walking around and everybody's having conversations. And they continue. One that I found out about well after I'd gotten past that point was Keiji Tang. I know him more as the voice of Ichiban Kasuga in the Like a Dragon games, was additional voices in Final Fantasy VII, and at a panel I attended, he was talking about how one of the characters he plays is a guy who's with a girl at the train station, and just one of these, just like, hey, it's getting kind of late, and maybe we should kind of get out of here, and, what's up going on with you, and this and that. The longer Cloud stands there, the more that character's going to comment on how long is that blonde guy going to stand around. Is he listening to us? This is getting kind of weird. And that's another way where, does that teach you more about how Midgar is? No. Maybe it teaches you more about how cities are and personal space exists as, but it also makes everything feel more alive, while also being kind of hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that NPCs on the whole is like a whole other can of worms, but just in the broader sense of how they interact in more modern games, it's some of my favorite stuff about wandering around Shibuya. Even if it's not vocalized banter around you, you can see word bubbles and like little bits of information here and there.
Yeah.
But I love that stuff. I think it really adds to the depth of the spaces you're in, especially if you're in a city kind of area in any kind of RPG or action game. You want it to feel lifelike. You don't want it to feel barren or empty. One of the weirdest things about some of the Uncharted games is that you'll move through these bustling cities and like you'll be passing people, but you won't be hearing anything. There won't be any conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The later games do add that kind of stuff. It reminds me also in like the Last of Us games, before you interact with a group of enemies that you have to fight your way through, they'll be just having regular conversations about their day, what they're doing, all of that stuff until you interact. And even when you're fighting them, they'll call out each other's names, which can get a little tropey, but it is meant to humanize the characters. Like as you kill someone, they yell his name in anguish because you took out this person who was their friend, even if they're looters and they want to kill you, right? It's this humanizing of the characters in the world too. I think that a lot of party banter and party banter adjacent stuff can do to make you really feel steeped in this adventure you're having.
And it can also unify us as those that play the game. When you talk about these sorts of games, especially when what is shouted or what is said is a little cliche, that just kind of becomes the fabric of how we talk about those games. I mean, would Star Fox 64 be as iconic as it is if Falco, Slippy, and Peppy still sounded like they did on the Super NES? You just got the... No, there's voices. And they will say certain things over and over again. Hey, Einstein, I'm on your side. These are...
Do a barrel roll.
Do a barrel roll. Google did a barrel roll because of Star Fox 64. If that was just a piece of text that popped up, that'd be cute. But you don't just do a barrel roll, you do a barrel roll. It's tonal, almost. This is a piece of it. And that is entirely the kind of thing that before we're like, God, that gets annoying. And yes, it does. Then it comes out the other side as iconic or mimetic, or it can come out the other side as iconic or mimetic. Sometimes it is just really annoying.
Like we think about world building and these kinds of conversations very tied to RPGs because they tend to have the meatiest and largest stories. But modern storytelling allows us to do that in just about any kind of game that we want. I think of the God of War games, the modern ones, God of War and God of War Ragnarok. When you're adventuring around with Atreus and he starts to tell a story or ask his dad some questions, if combat happens and it gets interrupted, then after combat, Atreus or Kratos will be like, no, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. And then continue the story where they left off. They have that in the new Guardians of the Galaxy game as well, in this way of making it feel more organic and more realistic. And so you don't lose those moments like you were talking about in Persona 3 Reload.
Yeah. And I think I'm harping over 2 episodes on how disappointed I am to lose those in Persona 3 Reload, because you also lack the ability and time to check in with your party members while you're exploring. Something I really loved doing in Persona 4 Golden was how at any given time you could talk to your party members. Usually they have 1 or 2 of the same things to say, but also you got outfits and costumes that you could give your characters or yourself. And then you could talk to them and they'd have something to say about it. And sometimes it would be different depending upon whether or not you were dating that person. And those are little silly things. This is a trigger response, cause and effect. But even as bald as that wire is, as far as knowing that for what it is, it still is something that I like finding out, and it's something I'm charmed by doing. We're unlocking outfits and things in Persona 3 Reload. Every male party member is wearing a tuxedo now. Some of them have top hats. Even the dog has a tuxedo.
Amazing.
And doesn't Koromaru-chan look like a dapper motherfucker in that tuxedo? I don't know how they feel about those tuxedos. If they didn't like them, maybe I'd change them out of them. Maybe I'd give them a different outfit, but I don't know how they feel about it. And that feels like such an easy thing, especially because that has been in the games in the past. In Persona 3 Portable, the first version of any Persona game that I played, when you are walking through Tartarus with your party, you can talk to them at any time. Like, you don't have to open up a menu or whatever else, and you'll get those pieces of commentary. They'll comment on who's in the party. They'll comment on how many people you brought with you. If you bring only one other person, they'll just be kind of like, so what are we doing up here, man? Those are just little cause and effect moments, but it feels good. It feels nice. It feels satisfying when you have a response to a choice that you make in a game. In RPGs in particular, open world games, we feel the absence of those sorts of responses far more keenly, where we kind of go, well, what happens if I do this? Even having a default response to it at least is, okay, something changed. It's those little specifics that feel really nice. Whether it's special conversations that happen between characters because you happen to bring someone to a place that matters to them, or you have to stop and open up the conversation or whatever it is, you are getting that response that makes everything feel more alive.
Words aren't even required. We talked about text boxes before, older games, before there was voice acting, but I'll take it to even another level. In Astrobot, when you find other bots or you just find other characters, peaceful characters in the world you're exploring, Astrobot will wave at them. They'll do a little dance together, right? It's the interactivity that makes you feel more involved in this thing you're exploring. And that's why I think games that don't have that kind of stuff on any level seem more barren, right? I think one of my favorite things about Star Wars Outlaws, a game that for a lot of folks was hit or miss, but I really loved, and I need to get back to finishing because I still haven't. The world feels alive because it's a Star Wars world, but because of how the characters call out at you, certain characters you can talk to, the lead character is always talking to Nyx, their little creature buddy that's with them, because the creature understands common, even though it doesn't speak it, like most of the animals in Star Wars. All of those moments make it feel like a Star Wars game. Not even just feel alive, but feel like what Star Wars does, because Star Wars always has lively spaces with lots of interactivity. There is a ton of banter in the Star Wars. Hello there. All of those moments in the Star Wars movies, new and old, are born out of this kind of fun give and take between characters. And it's so vital to that world. And playing certain older Star Wars games where that doesn't exist, it just makes it feel very barren, even more so than just because there's less life, but because Star Wars thrives in those moments of community.
Yeah, Star Wars A New Hope, it sets all of that up, that attitude, that everything, that non-verbal world building from the Mos Eisley Cantina. You walk in and you just get like quick shots of characters that do not appear at any other time for any other reason. This isn't foreshadowing. They're not setting something up. They're just going, this is a crazy fucking place. You'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy, says Obi-Wan Kenobi, whatever. But they raided the Jim Henson workshop and made some crazy stuff happen. But it fills in the world. And it's one that, where Star Wars was a world that has been mined for lore, for novels, for card games, for video games and everything else. Cool, they got that springboard, that's great. But also, you don't have to know the names that have been given to every one of those creatures shown in that one brief piece. But they're there. If you want to fill it in, great. But if not, you just go, wow, there is a whole galaxy out there. You don't have to fill any of it out. It took 30 seconds. All of that is going on. And you get a full view of something, a glimpse, and then we can move on. And then as other strange things happen, we've already established that this is a varied galaxy.
It's one of the best examples of this kind of need for this liveliness, right? We talk about how in the older games, you have to talk to everybody if you want to learn things. It's not because they don't have things to say, it's because limitations of the hardware means you have to engage to get that information. But ambient noise in more modern games, especially when it comes to the characters talking or just interactions with the world, it's basically a requirement for the world to feel lively. Now, of course, if you want to create a desolate wasteland where there is no life, that's less important. But even so, in those games like Fallout, those empty spaces where you're interacting with just yourself or your one companion, those moments with your companion as you're running around Fallout, if your companion was quiet all the time, would feel very weird because it's even more empty. So those companion moments are even more necessary. And I think Fallout New Vegas and 3 do it especially well, and even 4, for my issues with Fallout 4 on the whole, the interactivity of the characters and the companions you bring along are really interesting and really well done. Now, look, if you're looking to play a game for mechanics and you don't really care about the space, but even those games, I would venture to say military shooters, are good and feel hoorah in that way that they're designed to because of the banter between the characters, calling out shots, saying what they're looking for, talking about the mission updates, all of that stuff is just another kind of party banter that's designed to fill in the world and make you feel like you're in the middle of whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah, the conversations that happen in the later GTA games as you are going to and from missions, depending upon whether you succeeded or failed or anything like that. There are specific pieces of conversation that feel like you both have an effect and that there is a world happening that you exist within. And you need both of those. This butts up against the idea of large AAA games and sprawling worlds or smaller indie games or smaller worlds. And I definitely feel as though I would rather have a smaller, denser game so that I have a loop that I can get through and I feel like I can assail a few times and get different responses or explore what's going on within the world. I believe I've said before on this podcast, but I've definitely said this in conversations where video games kind of have the boring scenes of movies. Those are the fun parts and vice versa, because we don't want cutscenes all the time. We're wandering from place to place. And so let's have the world be and let's be a part of it while that happens.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned looping. I am currently endeavoring to finally get the epilogue in Hades. And Hades is a game where you don't have a party with you, but the people you encounter as you move through the space, which is another part of this conversation, all are interesting, all have fun things to say. And while they are just a static image or one of several variants of a static image, the words are voice acted so beautifully that you still feel deeply involved and connected. And every time I run into Sisyphus, and he talks about Boldy, his best friend, it always puts a smile on my face. And like, I'm finally at the point where I'm close enough to possibly pursue a relationship with Meg as well. All of that storytelling of why you're trying to escape this version of hell and pushing back against Hades and wanting to know your mother is great. And I love that narrative, but I don't think that narrative would have been as deeply engaging if every time you stepped out of the pool of blood, you woke up, the god of sleep is snoozing, trekking people in, or you encounter death or Achilles and have updates on what's going on around Tartarus or other places within this world. All of that brings it to life. And while they're not adventuring with you per se, you are engaged in the loop to encounter them every time. So they are basically your party for this game.
Yeah.
They are the people that you want to check in with.
I was actually going to argue I think it's Hypnos is the...
Hypnos.
Yes.
Yes, correct.
Those are absolutely the people you want to check in with. I want to switch up my weapons, not just because there's different things to unlock, but because I want to see what Skelly has to say about it while I get them. And
Yes.
You're absolutely right. I think, honestly, this wasn't the plan at the outset when we started this, but this conversation isn't so much about party banter specifically, but about, Matt, you hit the nail on the head, ambient noise of the world building. The drive to delve deeper and to be drawn in. Yeah, absolutely. These conversations that happen, whether it's how many times you've died, how you died in Hades, this is all speaking on Hades right now, how you died in Hades or what happened, or how many conversations you've had, what gifts you have brought them, what things you have seen, what messages you bring back and forth. Yeah, those are, again, world building and your effect within it. There is something so fun about Zagreus's, I'm not going to say laconic or lazy, but sort of withdrawn fervor in this world. There is a clear disconnect, but also like that is armor and a defense, while everything else in the land of the dead has so much life to it. I certainly want to seek all of it out, and I imagine you do too, Matt.
Yeah, it's why I'm hesitant to play Hades 2 before it's done, because I didn't play Hades till it came to Switch, and I've loved the world they built. And while, yes, the mechanics of Hades is incredible and a blast to play, when you find the weapon that clicks, it's really fun to play over and over again.
Right.
That's not the most important part to me. I want the hot people and the conversations and the romance. Like, that's why I play a lot of games. I would say I'm narrative forward. I like good mechanics, and an important game loop is important to me. But I think I am less likely to play a game that's mechanically good and narratively bad than the other way around. That's also because I play plenty of games that are narrative heavy, that are light on mechanics, that don't have bad mechanics. But like, I think of 1,000 Times Resist, which to say it has mechanics is almost too much, because it's just so minimal how you engage with the world other than having conversations with people. And so I think for something like Hades and Hades 2 specifically, I'm more inclined to wait for 1.0. Grateful that I was given it as a gift to play on PC, and have dabbled a little bit. But mostly I want to discover it fresh once it's done, right? Because I know there's still placeholders. I know the narrative is not finished. But you're right. I think the ambient noise of the world around you is what makes video games video games. It's what makes movies movies, right? If you were
Right.
watching Indiana Jones and he was moving through a market and there was no ambient noise, people selling things, shouting things, it would feel weird, just like we were talking about with Star Wars. And I think to that effect as well, the games I love most are the games that engage in that stuff, even to a comical degree. Because like I said, checking in, it becomes a point where it's like by Mass Effect 3, every time I'm on the Normandy, I check in after every single mission, and there isn't always an update after every single mission. But I want to know. I want to know what's going on in the lives of my crewmates and friends. I want to know what's going on. One of my favorite moments in Mass Effect 3, if you don't pursue a relationship with Garrus or Tali, they end up falling for each other, and you can walk in on them by accident. And it's just so delightful and dorky and really sweet. And like, those kinds of moments are what make these worlds worth moving through, in my opinion. People play games for a whole lot of different reasons, and I'm not here to naysay any of that. But for me, especially when talking about what started as party banter, but is more the effervescent life of a world that you're moving through, it's those small moments that mean almost more to me than how impactful the main narrative is. A good main story is always key, but if I have those small moments, even in games like Mass Effect Andromeda, which I didn't love as much as other games, I did like, but not as much as the other Mass Effect games, I still enjoyed my time with, because those character moments are there. It's what BioWare does best, is creating those in-depth characters and worlds, going to the planets that are lived in, that do have cities that you can move through, cushion everything about what I love about a video game, because it really does kind of fill in that space that I think is really meaningful to me.
Yeah, they give you very surprising moments. There's plenty of epic quests in video games that we could sit here and start listing them off, that have that moment towards the end of the game where there is either doubt or overwhelming odds or something, that you then get encouragement or memories from your party, from people you've encountered in your travels, from someone you haven't seen in tens of hours in your playthrough, but maybe left an impression, or you forgot that you remembered them until you were reminded. Any of these ambient noise pieces are instrumental in giving those weight, because, man, it sucks when you take that big swing for an emotional moment and it's just, why am I supposed to care about this? I think having this ambient noise can be a lot for some people and in some games, but it's worth pursuing and it's worth doing because, yeah, you're right. When you want to see how everybody's doing, whether because it's a gamer feeling of, ooh, new content, I want to see what the new content is, or you actually genuinely care as somebody engaging in the narrative, both have the same effect. You are actively and enthusiastically engaging in the storytelling of the game. Something like Hades, the way that all the fun hot people and all those fun conversations are, ties in well to what the gameplay is, where you are flinging yourself in a Sisyphusian way to get out. The difference between Zagreus and Sisyphus is you can get out, but you are still engaging in it and learning and opening as you go. So, yeah, I think those little moments are key. They don't land with everybody, but I hope to see more small, dense experiences that have vast and beautiful worlds to explore.
Yeah. I mean, I think also these things lead to the best connected worlds. The reason I mention Mass Effect and Dragon Age so much is because they are a series of games where your choices matter. How much they matter is up to you and sometimes up to the devs, but they do matter. They impact the next game. They impact the characters that you interact with. In the same way, I love the Remedyverse. both Alan Wake games, Control, the inevitable Control 2, all of them play off each other, and it's the world that they're building with these characters that recur in multiple places that make it feel connected. We've mentioned the MCU on the podcast a few times, and I'm still a big fan. I recently watched Agatha All Along, and the reason I love that show is because it's the smallest moments from other Avengers films, from WandaVision, that make the payoff in Agatha work well. It's also a really well-made show with really great actors and really great storytelling, but it's those things too. The reason I geek out about the Venom trilogy, besides loving them, is because there are these little nods to fans who are just fans of the comics, but also little nods to just the world they've built within those three films. Same with the MCU. The MCU works and doesn't work because of how they invest in that world building. And I think it's basically the same to say for video games. None of this is new, but I think leaning into that connectivity, especially through the characters, is some of the best ways to make people go, hey, that's awesome. Spider-Man No Way Home works for a multitude of reasons, but it mostly works because we care about those characters. And getting to see them again is huge. It's just huge. And you can't fake that. That's something that investment and fans and the love of the character bring. Every time the Arrowverse had a cameo of a previous actor having played a character that there is now interacting with the modern version of that character, it works because of the world building in those previous places. It's not just a throwaway. If it were just a throwaway cameo, it wouldn't work as well. Stan Lee works because of this idea that maybe he's a Watcher or the Beyonder or some celestial that just shows up everywhere, right? Adds to the narrative, whether it's true or not, but is fun also because of the heart that's in those cameos. They're not just throwaways.
And they never make them too long.
No. And I think, like I said, that kind of like investment in world building is what makes some of the stronger stories stand out, as well as other weakers not.
Yeah, I think so. And I look forward to seeing how future titles that I delve into. I should be picking up my copy of Veilguard this week, and I look forward to seeing how Party Banter has evolved. After I finish up Persona 3 Reload, I'm looking forward to, it probably will be early 2025 when I start playing Metaphor ReFantasia, but I'm very excited to get into it. And I look forward to how Party Banter goes on there in the ambient world that we live in while we play those games.
Same. I mean, I think the reason Dragon Age, the Veilguard, has impressed me so much, even though I still hate the name and it's dumb, I understand why they changed it. You get that pretty early on. And it makes sense as a name for the narrative, but I still hate the name. That said, even though it's more streamlined, even though the worlds aren't as big as Inquisition was, it still feels lived in because of the dedication to the characters and the individual moments. It's night and day between the side quests in 16 and the Veilguard, because every side quest has purpose, has narrative, has interesting characters, good voice acting. It's not just go kill 20 chocobos, which I would never. Although they eat chocobos in those worlds. You know they do. They don't show it, but they do. They must. They're giant chickens.
I want to know what a chocobo tastes like.
But that said,
I'm never going to know.
I mean, you might someday.
You're right. But how will we know? Do different chocobos from different Final Fantasies taste different? They look the same, but there's so many species that look similar, but have a different aspect to them. And what is the most delicious chocobo? Well, this was some fun ambient conversation write in. Let us know. What do you think is the most delicious show? Not an individual. Don't be like Boko's the most delicious one. We know Boko's the most delicious one. But which one? I don't know.
I also apologize in advance to our vegetarian and vegan listeners, but
they're fictional.
So it's true. Anyway, before we get more off the rails, please tell us what you think of the ambient noise of the worlds you move through. Do you like party banter? Do you like interacting with civilians in large spaces in video games? Do you ignore all that shit because you don't care and just want to get to the next mission? All of it is valid, but I'm curious what you folks think about it, because I really do think it is key to making a modern video game, whether indie or AAA.
Yeah. Do you have favorite party members that you bring with you? Favorite places to go because of the conversations you've heard? What are the things that are said that really opened your eyes or really got you to connect with a game that you were enjoying, but it's okay, that really locked it in for you? What are those conversations? What are those pieces? Let us know. Please reach out. There's so many great ways to get in touch with us. We are Fun and Games Pod across all social media platforms that we are active on. As of this episode, that is Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Tumblr. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, what you'd like us to talk about, and who you'd like us to talk with in future episodes. Let us know about your favorite ambient conversations, your overheard in Thetis, as it were. Send us pictures of your video game collection. Still no one's done it yet. I'm waiting on that. It's fine. You can go to certainpov.com and find not only other fantastic Certain POV podcasts, but a permanent invite link to our Discord server where a lot of these conversations continue, and you can treat those as the ambient conversation in the world you have an impact in as well. If you like this show and have the means and desire to support us so that we can go to conventions and get better interview equipment and continue developing this thing that we're doing, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/funandgamespod. There is a free tier. You do not have to pledge any money to take part in the polls that we put up, to have the one-stop shop of all the things that Matt and I are working on as Fun and Games. And we'd like to shout out those on the high score tier and above. Today, the high score board is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Nyden, Roger Reichart, Alejandro Alves, Curly Bright, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Robert Prine, Sean Bowen, and Wes Bates. Thank you so much for your support. Please enter your initials. Don't listen too hard to what's being talked about while you're putting those letters in. It doesn't have anything to do with you, but everyone's really proud of you. Just know that everyone is so proud of you, just like we are.
Also, if you're looking for a free alternative to support the podcast, besides joining the Patreon for free, you can also rate and review the podcast. Rating and review takes a few minutes, and it's honestly the best way for any podcast to break through the wall that is the algorithm and get noticed. And that way, when we share our episode about party banter and people search for it, they will find this one first, because there are probably a lot of podcasts talking about the ambient noise of the worlds that we live and move through. I'm really glad I came to that thesis. By complete accident, I will absolutely sell myself out, but we get there sometimes.
It's such an organic thing. It just feels so real.
It does, right? Exactly. We're part of the party chat of your life. But yes, please rate and review the podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Good Pods, and so many others allow you to rate and review, and it really does help podcasts like us get found by new listeners to come and join in the conversation.
Absolutely. Whether you are rating and reviewing, thank you so much. Joining us on Patreon, part of the Discord, or if this is your first episode of Fun and Games podcast you're listening to, thank you all so much for your support and for being here. We couldn't do this without you. This is one about conversations, but this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm at AK Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey.
Oh, hey, Geoff.
What's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.